I sometimes get the question, is it creepy for me to look up my interviewer on LinkedIn? And the answer is no, it is not creepy, and it's a smart strategy. So I'm going to show you how to do it like a pro. Hi, I'm Shelley Piedmont, a former recruiter turned career coach, and I want you to thrive and not just survive your job. Here's the reality check you need to hear. They have already been researching you. They may have looked up your LinkedIn profile. They may have Googled you. And so they know a lot of information about you. So why wouldn't you want to get information about them? That's great strategy, because what this allows you to do is elevate the conversation from a generic interview to a back and forth where you are able to really connect with that interviewer. So when you're doing research on LinkedIn, what are you looking for about your interviewer? Well, it's actually three main things. The first is, do you have any common ground with that interviewer? So you can look at that profile and check out, did you go to a same school? Or do you volunteer in the same type of organizations? Do you know the same people? Having some common ground is a great icebreaker for the conversation. The second thing you want to learn is anything that's going on at the company or in the industry. So an about section might talk about some of the projects this person has worked on, or you might get an idea about something that's important in the industry that this person is talking about. This is great intelligence to understand what is going on in that organization. So perhaps you can talk about that in your answers to build that bridge that you understand the organization and that you can solve its problems. The third thing you want to understand about them is what is important to them professionally. So, you have an about section, even your experience sections, and what they're posting about or commenting about. So perhaps they are really focused on innovation, or they talk a lot about being a mentor. Knowing this information is really helpful because you can then talk about the things that they find important and build that connection with them. That is helpful for them to see you as a kindred spirit and one they want on their team. If you like this content, I always appreciate hitting that like button and go ahead and subscribe to my channel. It really helps. There are lots of areas that you can look at on a person's LinkedIn profile. So here's some things that you might want to key into. First of all, look at their about section. This section, a person can do however they want, and it's a good insight into what they think about themselves and what matters to them. Of course, you want to look at their experience section because you want to see what companies they've worked for, their career progression, and any kind of narrative around some of the things that they've done. You want to look at their education and certification area to understand where they went to school, what have they studied, and if you have any shared connection there. You also want to look at their featured section. So many people don't have anything in a featured section, but when a person does, you know that's important to them to know what they want to make sure others see. You also want to look at their activity feed. So if they're posting or if they're commenting and what they're reacting to, that gives you some good insight into what is important to them. You also want to look at companies that they're following. If you see some interesting companies, that might be something that you want to bring up in your interview. You also want to look at the skills section. What do they feel are their most important skills? And what are people endorsing them for? You also want to look at their recommendations area. This is great because you can look at not only the recommendations they've given, but also the ones they've received. That gives you good insight ones that they've given on what is important to them, and then obviously the ones they were given in terms of what other people think of them. You will want to look at the mutual connections you have. So if there's somebody you both know in common, that's a great starter for a conversation. You also want to look at groups that they may be associated with. That gives you an insight into their interests. And then lastly, you might want to look at volunteer work if they have that. There might be something in common in terms of causes that you feel are important to you that this other person shares. LinkedIn is a great place to find information, but don't limit yourself to LinkedIn. You have a lot of other information that you might be able to find in other sites. So you can do an internet search or you can have AI help you. But places you might want to think about would include the company website. Maybe they have a bio page or your interviewer is mentioned somewhere there. You can also look to see if they have been a guest on a podcast or that they've been a conference speaker. You can also look to see if they've been involved in any professional organizations or that they have been associated with any volunteer organizations. The thing about this is it won't take you all that long to do this research, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. But a lot of people that interview don't do this. So any information you gather may be important to be able to develop that connection, and it's something that your competition is not doing. Now that you've gathered this intelligence, you want to think about how you can use that to your advantage in the interview. And there's 3 areas where that might be a good place. The first is before the interview starts and you're doing the small talk. Now, you don't want to force anything into the conversation. It should come naturally, but maybe you're a hiker and you notice that the interviewer is one. You can mention that. Or you can talk about maybe a volunteer experience that you do that may be relatable to the interviewer. Or you may even say, you both went to the same school, the same university, and mention how much of a good time you had there and found that experience valuable. Now, you want to make sure that it doesn't sound creepy. So that's when if you talk about really personal stuff, that might be off-putting to the interviewer. Don't say that, but things that are kind of general that you can kind of put in there and say that you notice this about them, that actually is networking. It's building the bond. And most interviewers will actually think of that as a positive and not a negative. The second place that you want to weave your intelligence in is when you are in the answering part of the interview. So your interviewer has asked you a question and you realize there is something from that interviewer's background that you can bring into your answer. So as an example, if they've talked about sustainability and that maybe they're working on something about that, you can say in an answer, yes, my company did such and such, and I see that might be similar to a project that this company has been working on. Or you could say something like, yeah, my experience aligns with the organization's move into whatever it might be. And that is really helpful because one of the things that the interviewer is looking at you for is not only can you do the job, but will you fit in with the culture and with the team? So if you're talking sort of the same language as that interviewer, they're going to think more positively that yes, you can fit in with that culture and team. And the third area of the interview where having this intelligence is important is when you're going to ask questions. So you can frame your questions to show that you've done your research, but also to get really important information. So as an example, perhaps, this interviewer has talked about a project that their department is working on, and you can ask about that project, mention the project, and get some understanding of how the completion of that project is going to make a difference for the company. Or you can, if you saw that the person has been with the company maybe more than a decade, ask them about the changes that they have seen in the organization over that decade and maybe what keeps them engaged, what keeps them inspired. There's a story there. You want to show that you are interested in the organization, you're interested in this interviewer, and therefore you would be a very good person on the team, and you are doing something that a lot of the people who will be interviewing haven't done, and that will show. Why spending the 10 to 15 minutes to do this is important? It's because your competition has probably generic level information about the organization and is going into this interview knowing nothing about the interviewer. You are different. You know about the organization, you know what's important, you know what makes this interviewer tick. You might even know the hot buttons that you're going to want to talk about in the interview because you know that's important to them. That's the difference. And when it is a competitive job market, those differences can make all the difference. If you need help with your interview prep, it's something I really enjoy doing because I know a lot of people could get the job, but sometimes they don't put their best foot forward. Let me help you with that. More information is in the description.